I'm Rain Michaels. I'm a senior interaction designer with Google, and I'm also one of the co-facilitators of the W3C Cognitive Accessibility Task Force, or COGA Task Force, as we like to call it. And I'm really happy to be here today to speak with you about a document that the task force has created called Making Content Usable for People with Cognitive and Learning Disabilities. And with that, I'll go ahead and move right into the content. Actually, first I should probably just describe myself for those of you who want to know what I look like. I am a smallish white woman with medium-length brown hair and very large, very thick glasses. And I try to smile a lot. So hopefully that gives you a picture of what I look like. So with that, we have three objectives really with this particular deck. And when I say we, I'm saying that because this content that I'm presenting today, I did not develop this content alone. This is content that really comes out of the Cognitive Accessibility Task Force. And this deck is really the result of the task force's work. So I want to make sure that that's clear. And there's three objectives that we have that we really want to share and why we're here right now. The first is we want to give a really sort of concrete way to understand what COGA, or cognitive accessibility, what that actually means. The second objective that we have is to enable you to feel confident making use of the document, Content Usable. It is a dense and massive document. So we want to give you the tools to be able to actually use it. And then from there, the third objective for this presentation is to help you have practical next steps that you, your organizations, your teams, whatever it is that you're working on, that you can actually take to start to bring cognitive accessibility into your work. So with that, I'll start out with what is cognitive accessibility and what does it mean? Well, cognitive accessibility, first of all, is an imperative. We are living in a time when digital experiences are ubiquitous. They are becoming increasingly essential for self-care, for safety, for independence. And these experiences are used and depended on by everyone. And when we mean everyone, we truly do mean everyone. Before this session, Heidi and I were talking about our children, and my 5-year-old went, well, now 7, but went through kindergarten in these online experiences because of COVID. We have elderly individuals who are in maybe middle stages of some kind of care that impacts their memory, who are living independently and relying on these interfaces for their safety, their well-being. So this is truly about everyone. The other thing to keep in mind is that cognitive accessibility, or cognitive disability, is the largest disability category in the world. And it's also worth noting that the numbers that we have are probably severely low and not actually reflective of the real numbers and the real impact of cognitive disabilities and cognitive accessibility. So the numbers that we do have right now say that around 930 million plus people in the world are impacted by cognitive accessibility barriers in interfaces that they engage with. Some of the reasons for this number, or some of the sort of diagnoses and statistics that can go with these numbers, include looking at the US population, where in 2019, the CDC found that approximately 12% of the US population are estimated to have cognitive disabilities. The UN is projecting that by 2050, 1 in 6 people in the world will be over the age of 65. Also, we know that somewhere between 10 and 20% of the world shows signs of dyslexia. This comes from a Yale study in 2021. And that's a huge number, a huge range, 10 to 20%. So what does that really mean? What that really means is that there are a large number of people in the world who are severely affected by dyslexia and as a result have barriers to accessing text but they don't actually know that they have dyslexia or that is the reason for the barrier. We also are seeing an increase in prevalence of autism diagnoses. So right now, about 1% of the global population, according to the World Health Organization in 2021, is autistic. We believe that that number is probably quite higher because now there is a much stronger understanding of what autism really means. And so people are receiving diagnoses that they should have received earlier in their life. I am a perfect example of one of those individuals who received a diagnosis after my son got his diagnosis, and we realized that there were commonalities. So this is really reflective of this. This is a large population, but it's also an underestimated population. And many of the people who are in it, they don't know that some of the challenges that they may be experiencing in their daily lives are because of accessibility barriers for things that are not built in a way that's really meant to bring them into the experience. So now let's sort of think a little bit about, well, what does that actually mean? So individuals who have cognitive disabilities and differences, they may have some challenges with certain functional needs. And we're calling them functional needs as opposed to diagnoses because it's really, there's no real universal language to categorize cognitive disabilities. You will hear cognitive disabilities described in so many different ways, in so many different places and categorizations. There's also not necessarily a one-to-one mapping between a disability diagnosis and the actual functional needs that somebody may have. So for a very long time, I personally suspected I was dyslexic because my functional needs mapped very well to what I was hearing from other individuals who are dyslexic. And it wasn't until later that I realized, oh, actually, I'm not dyslexic, I'm autistic. My functional needs may be a little bit different from another autistic individual's functional needs. So with that in mind, thinking about what that actually means as designers, developers, as people who are coming up with the next great technological innovations, what we really want to be thinking about are the functional skills, the cognitive functional skills that people have to use continually in our interfaces. And how can we enable people to use the functional skills that they're good at rather than relying on them to struggle through an interface that depends on functional skills that maybe are not as strong for them. So what are these skills? So a really important one is attention. And attention comes down to the kind of ability to focus your attention. So the ability to stay focused on something specific. But it also means the ability to redirect attention to something else. So there's something that I experience called perseverance, where I might be so focused on something specific that I might not notice something really important that actually needs my attention. So there are actually different aspects of directing attention and helping somebody with those attentional skills, that skill to direct attention as needed, as appropriate, and to shift it where it needs to be when it needs to be shifted. Another is language and literacy. So language and literacy is this massive category of functional skill, but it has to do with visual processing, decoding characters, decoding illustrations, being able to kind of understand hidden meaning or implied meaning within a text, being able to write fluently. So there are many individuals for whom their ability to kind of write in their mind and come up with these beautiful linguistic tomes, perhaps, they may actually not be able to physically type out those words or handwrite them at the speed at which their mind is able to come up with the work itself. So how can we support individuals who have those differing strengths and weaknesses? There's a huge amount more, but we could go on forever. So I'll move on to learning. Learning is a really interesting one because it's usually defined in terms of the individual's ability to actually kind of take in and maintain information. But it's also often sort of looked at in the context of skills. Reading disabilities, for example, might be looked at in the learning space. But also there are individuals who have difficulty with numerical processing or understanding, for me right now on this presentation, I have a number countdown that's telling me how much time is left. And for me, fortunately, that works. I'm fine with numbers. They work quite well for me. But for somebody else, they might need something more like, I have this thing called a time timer. And it's a visual representation of how much time is left. And I'm showing it now on my screen where I just have this little timer and I've dialed a little dial and I now see a big red area that shows me how much time I have left in this presentation. So it gives me a non-numerical way to understand how much time I have left. Then we also have memory. Memory is a fun one because it's super complex as well. We often think about memory in terms of long-term and short-term memory. And both of these are super important. Long-term memory has a lot to do with learning. Short-term memory has a lot to do with kind of executive functioning or taking care of yourself throughout the day, going from task to task and knowing what you need to do next. But it can also have to do with visual memory, spatial memory. If you know where things are based on sort of your physicality, your body may actually rely on that memory. There's also auditory memory. Certain auditory cues might have certain memory implications for you. So those are also important things to consider. And then finally, there's this monster category of executive function, which could in some ways kind of cover everything, but it's really an individual's ability to kind of plan, to organize, to sequence, an individual's ability to also sort of have the emotional sort of control or regulation or self-monitoring that they need in order to navigate a specific situation the way that they intend to. And for some individuals, they may need some additional supports with executive functioning. And we'll actually go into some patterns that can kind of help with some of these things as well. So these functional needs may very much be kind of permanent needs for individuals. There are many individuals who may have something that they are going to sort of have, they're going to have strengths in some areas and weaknesses in others, and really need something to help them where they have weaknesses so that they can get through some of the barriers that they may experience. But it's also important to note that a lot of these functional needs can be situational or temporary as well, and can impact anybody at any time. So I have a picture on this slide that I'm showing right now, and the photo is of a father who's at a table with his computer in front of him. His phone is sort of connected between his ear and his shoulder, which is holding his phone to his ear. He has probably I want to say a 2-year-old with a giant teddy bear on his lap. And then he's probably got a 6 or 7-year-old sitting near him doing her homework. So this individual is heavily distracted. His attention has to go in many different places. He's probably not able to really make full use of whatever working memory skills he has at the moment. So this is a situation where he has some serious cognitive barriers and is going to need some supports in order to effectively navigate all of these situations that he's trying to get through right now. Other examples that can cause situational or temporary cognitive support needs might be fatigue, stress, distraction, being in a place or in a situation where you're using unfamiliar languages or measurements, and many, many more. I'm sure at this moment, many of you are probably thinking of many that you experience in your own daily lives on a regular basis. So that was objective one. Just trying to kind of get a sense of what is cognitive accessibility. So I'll wrap up this section by really kind of defining the word COGA. And sort of introducing you to the task force and then moving into the document that we're going to be talking through. So COGA, C-O-G-A, the COGA task force within the W3C is focused on cognitive accessibility. So we've taken the first 3 letters of the word cognitive and the first letter of the word accessibility and turned it into COGA for short. The COGA task force is a task force that works with 2 parent groups, the Accessibility Guidelines Working Group and the Applications, Protocols, and Architecture Working Group. And these 2 working groups, they really are the guardians of and the ones who work on WCAG and ARIA. So the work of these groups is work that you're likely very familiar with. The Cognitive Accessibility Task Force is working on creating supplemental guidance that can further extend those documents that you may rely on, and also to look at how we can create new guidance for the future that will hopefully help us make the world more cognitively, especially the digital world, more cognitively accessible. And the first step in that is this document that we're about to go into, making content usable for people with cognitive and learning disabilities. So this is a W3C note with supplemental guidance, and I will have links to it throughout the deck, and there are links in the deck that you can download. So with that, I will move on and start talking about the document itself, making content usable. I am now showing a slide on the screen that I do not expect you to read. In fact, if you're trying to read it, please stop right now. This is a very dense visual image with a whole lot of words. And the point that I'm trying to make here is that this is a screenshot directly from the content usable document. It is a very long document. I tend to use text to speech. I run my text to speech at 2x speed, so 2 times normal speed. And it took me about 12 hours to do a proofread of the entire document using that setting. So I want to sort of lay that as an expectation. This is a long and dense document. And we really wanted to make sure, the COGA task force, long before I even joined, has been working so hard on this and really wanted to make sure that what needed to be in there is there. So there's a lot in here. If you have the time, please do read it. And please let us know what's missing. But if you need to try to have that map, that understanding of what's available, that's what this session is for, to try to help you know what's here, how do you find it, and hopefully then how do you make use of it. So now I've moved on to a much more digestible slide. And this slide says, making content usable removes cognitive barriers. That's the goal. The document is about removing cognitive barriers. And it's trying to do so through 5 distinct sections of content. So the first section is about objectives. What are the objectives or goals that we need to be considering in order to support cognitive needs when we're designing, when we're developing? The second section is user stories. And I'm going to go into a couple of these user stories in a moment. But here we're trying to give you narratives that will help explain some more complex barriers that might be a little less clear or a little less obvious when you're starting to think about your designs. And these stories are the kinds of stories that you might be able to use in your own personas, in your heuristic evaluations, in your testing. These kinds of stories can give you ideas of some of the things to maybe consider. And then we have design guidance. This is a long section that gives you patterns to use and avoid that will help support cognitive accessibility. And then we also have an entire section on user testing, because testing on your own is, even if you are somebody like me who has certain cognitive accessibility needs, your own testing and your own experience is not going to catch the complexity and range. So we have a lot of guidance on how to do that user testing and really bring people in to find what you can't find on your own. And then we also have in here some personas. These are people for you to kind of imagine and work with. And these are based on real world stories. And it gives you a sense of just how integral to daily lives this content really is and what to consider. So with that, I'm going to go into some some user stories using a couple of our personas. I have three sample user stories to go into, and I'll go through these one at a time. So the first story that I'm going to talk about is from a persona of an individual named Jonathan. And Jonathan is a therapist with dyscalculia. So just to remind you, dyscalculia is it's a diagnosis and relates to individuals who have difficulty with processing numbers, numerical concepts. And so an example of a barrier that Jonathan may experience on a regular basis is his schedule. You know, he's got a visual schedule or calendar in front of him, and it says that he has a meeting at 15:30 UTC. And he knows that right now it's lunchtime, but he doesn't know, did he miss the meeting? Is the meeting, did it already happen? Is it happening soon? Does he have time for lunch? He doesn't actually know that because he's trying to sort of numerically place 15:30 UTC and understand, is that lunchtime? And where does that fit into his calendar? So an easy solution in this particular example for this particular story would be, as we do often see on calendar apps, where you'll have a line across the calendar. Now know that I have 25 minutes left for the talk, and I have a visual indication of that amount of time that's not numerically oriented. So these are some combination of numbers and letters, and that can become really problematic as well. And we still see CAPTCHAs that have math equations in them. And so is there a way for Jonathan to get through that kind of experience? So providing logins that are simple, single step, and that don't rely on memory or transcription, where numbers may become really important. Now I'm going to talk about Allison. Allison is a retiree with a mild cognitive impairment, or MCI diagnosis. MCI diagnosis is kind of a complicated one. And so we won't go into what that diagnosis really means, but it does have to do with, it does in many occasions impact memory and indicate that somebody will feel more comfortable when they have familiar interfaces in front of them. So an example of a barrier for Allison, my colleague Lisa, co-facilitator on the task force, she likes to use the example of Allison is trying to buy a ticket for a cruise. She wants to go on a cruise with her friends and she's trying to buy that ticket. And she presses the button on the screen that looks like buy, affordance. There's no indication, no feedback from her actual action of clicking that button or selecting that button. Nothing happens next. It doesn't look like it goes into the cart. And so Allison doesn't know, did I actually do anything? Did it happen? Is the site broken? Or what often happens for the users in these scenarios is they blame themselves. They say, oh, well, I'm not good at this technology. It's my fault. And I really want to challenge that because it's not her fault. this is built for her, right? She should be able to use it. So it's actually the design's fault that Allison doesn't know what to do, or the way that it was implemented. So how can we help Allison in this case? Well, we can make sure that a title that says buy doesn't look like a button, and a button that's meant to buy, that to be used to actually have the user go through the process of purchasing, that very clearly does look like a button. And if there's intersectional needs, and Allison is a screen reader user as well, we also want to make sure that that is actually clearly done in a semantic way that can be picked up in other ways as well, and very accurately conveyed back to Allison so that she understands exactly what it is that will happen when she presses that button. So if it's very clear, if she has that sort of familiarity, and then she gets the right feedback from the system that says, okay, now this has been added to your cart, then Allison knows that she's successfully made the next step in this purchase flow, and she can continue on to purchasing the cruise. So some of the ways that we can help Allison, well, using familiar hierarchy in design, really relying on what people know. And I'm not arguing for not innovating and coming up with better design, but we need to be very thoughtful when we do this, that we're not actually blocking people from being able to use the tools that we're creating. We also want to make sure that controls are very clearly identified as controls, that they're semantically coded the way that they need to be for the behaviors of those controls, and that there is in the design that really makes it clear how to use it. There's the very classic Don Norman example in the design of everyday things of a door. And do you know if you're meant to push or pull the door? And the way that the handle is shaped is giving you cues. Are you meant to pull or push? So think about that in the way that the controls are established. Are you clearly identifying in how they're set up, how they're meant to be used? And then finally, for Allison, another really important thing to do for her is to make it easy to find help. Allison may not always be able to get through the interface herself. And that should be okay, because it should be possible for her to then find the help that she needs in order to get through the interface with the content creator's assistance. The final story that I'm going to focus on here, rather than going through all of them, since we don't have all day, is Kwame. Kwame is a researcher who has had a brain injury. So this is somebody who's experienced a traumatic brain injury, or you may have heard the term TBI for traumatic brain injury. So this individual is, as a researcher, this individual is presumably highly educated and probably a complex problem solver, as researchers need to be. But at the same time, he has an accessibility barrier. He needs his memory to be supported because sometimes he won't remember what happened a moment ago. So the barrier that we're describing in this particular story is, I forgot what I added to a shopping order and hit the back button. It reloaded everything and I had to start over from the beginning. I'm imagining right now that everyone watching this is smiling because I'm sure every single person has done this at least once. But for somebody in Kwame's position, the impact of this is 10 times or more severe than it would be for probably most of the people who are smiling, maybe not all, but most of the people who are smiling right now because they've experienced this. Because what this means is that the amount of effort, cognitive effort, that Kwame already put into getting to this point has now been completely wiped away. And chances are pretty good that he won't even continue. And he becomes what we would think of as an invisible user who is no longer even recognized as a potential user because they can't even get to the point where they can give the feedback that they may want to give so that you can recognize that there's something that needs to be fixed in your system. So how do we help Kwame in this situation? There are two pretty clear ways to do this. One is to make sure that there's always a way to know what he did, what he just did. So if he just added something to the cart, let him know what he added. That's one way. Another way is to give him a clear way to step back one step if he needs to. And then the other way is just to make sure that that browser back button always works, because there are still a lot of people who really rely on that browser back button, that built-in back button, as that sort of fail-safe to always get them back where they need to go if they can't find the other ways to do so. So other things that we might think about in terms of supporting Kwame might include using clear page structure without too much content, so that it's easy for him to refer back to something if he needs to have kind of a memory check. We might also be able to help him avoid and correct mistakes. There are some patterns that we'll talk about shortly to support that. And then also helping the user prepare, helping Kwame prepare for the task ahead of time. So a good example of this in the shopping cart story would be he's going to put a certain number of things into his shopping cart, and then at a certain point he's going to need to check out. Well, what does he need to check out? Does he need a mailing address? Does he need an email address? Does he need a form of payment or some kind of a code? What should he have on hand before he starts that checkout process, so that he can actually make sure he has all of that before he gets into a situation where it might actually risk his ability to complete the flow if he has to look for something along the way. And now we're going to move on to the third part of this talk, which is how. So in Content Usable, we have 8 objectives. And I'm going to go through each of these objectives and share each of the 8 objectives at a high level, along with 3 patterns that you may use to help support those objectives. This is super high level. There's much more content in the document itself. So please know that this is only a surface review of what's here. So the first objective that we have is help users understand what things are and how to use them. How might we support this? How might we help people understand what things are and how to use them? Well, first of all, it's important to make sure that there's a clear purpose to everything on the page. And that includes the page itself, or the content or the interface element within the page. And you might be thinking, well, okay, we always have a title on our page, right? Or the user knows why they've gotten into this screen. They're in the checkout flow, so the purpose is checking out. But do they know what site, what shopping site they're checking out through? Or do they know that this particular modal, asking them for permission for some kind of access, is related to a specific need or question in a specific app? Do they have that information in the element itself that they are currently working on? We've already talked about the next support that's listed here, which is clear operation. We were talking about this when we were talking about Allison. Thinking about our buttons and our interface elements, are they clear? Is it clear that they're buttons? Is what will happen when they are used clear? Does the user know what path is going to occur, or will they be surprised? Will things work as expected? Will the back button on the browser get them back one step in their interface? And then another way to help support people understand what things are and how to use them is to think about using useful symbols or other sort of modalities for presenting information other than text or numbers. So again, we spoke about this a little bit with some of our personas, Jonathan, who needs help with numerical processing, or some other individuals may really benefit from having a visual or an icon or some kind of illustration paired with the text to help maybe uncover implied meaning within the text itself, or help them sort of better understand what's being conveyed. So these are some things to think about in terms of offering ways to help the user understand what things are and how to use them. The second objective is helping users find what they need. And here we have a number of ways, a number of patterns to help support this. And a lot of these will sound like simply good design. It's like, okay, well, of course we want to do these things. Of course we want to design something really well. What's listed here are findable, searchable, and clear navigation. And yes, these are all tenets of good design, but I want to go back to that point that when somebody has an accessibility barrier, the difficulty of bad design, or even sort of seemingly good but not quite good enough design, can have a 10 times negative impact on the individual that really becomes a blocker and makes it impossible for them to use the system. So when we're talking about findability, we're talking about information on the page being easy to identify, and that the important information, not just any information is easy to identify, but that the person accessing that information can really tell right away what is the most important information on this page and what are the critical functions on this page. If I'm on a shopping page, where do I find out how much this costs and how to buy it? If I'm trying to fill out my tax forms, where do I find out the process that I need to go through or the stuff that I need to have available to finish this tax form? And how do I make sure that I know how to submit it? Another really important one is thinking about searchable. So searchable, a search field or making sure that your content is searchable has become fairly ubiquitous, which is great. But it's also important to think of it as really the fallback that people will rely on, again, when all else fails. So when somebody gets to needing to be able to kind of use search features in order to get to your content, they may use the search field in your site or application. They may use the search field in their browser, or they may use Control or Command F to find text on a page. Are the words that you've used sufficient to enable somebody to actually find something if they're sort of struggling to know exactly what it is that they're meant to be looking for? Have you used the right semantic headers with the right sort of visual design in order to ensure somebody can kind of skim and use that facility to sort of see the structure and search for what they're looking for? Are you flexible with your search requirements? Are you requiring somebody to spell a word perfectly? Or are you allowing them to say something similar? My daughter sometimes describes cats as the furry things with whiskers because the word cat doesn't come to her mind. So should she be able to find cats through furry things with whiskers? And there actually might be a good argument to be made for that, because that probably is what she's talking about. And then finally, clear navigation. Really think about the structure and navigation of your content and ensure that it makes sense. This is a funny one. So what does make sense mean? And that can be different for a lot of people. And we'll actually kind of talk about that in the next objective. But thinking about that structure and navigation, does it make sense? Does it help people with wayfinding? Does it take people through the steps and give them clear anchors that can enable them to get back to different points in the system without having to rely on sort of a memory of something that they don't have access to at the moment? So in terms of supporting what that clarity might look like, our next objective is use clear and understandable content. And wow, is this a difficult one, because it's so hard to define or understand what clear or understandable content might mean. But the first sort of pattern here to think about is using clear language. So clear and unambiguous language that is appropriate for the context. And those words are chosen by the task force very specifically. We are not using simple language here. We are using clear language, because sometimes simple language is not actually appropriate for the context and may create more confusion. So it's important to sort of think about, is there hidden meaning in the words that I'm using or the way that they're framed? is there something that is implied? And if there is, if there's hidden meaning or if there's implied meaning, or if something should mean something else, but you're using it in this context because you think it's an easier word to use, start to step back and really evaluate, is this actually clear and understandable language? The next one would be visual presentation. So when you're actually creating your content layouts, think about taking advantage of chunking, boxes, white space, containers, your headers, your semantic markup. If you're using HTML and you're creating a really nice sort of document object model that has really clear headers, really well done from a semantic perspective, do you have your landmarks in place? Using all of that to really create a visual presentation that shows an individual what content is connected to what, so that they're not making incorrect connections. And this slide here, or the formatting of these slides, I attempted to do that in these slides by essentially creating the effect of a visual box around each of the 3 patterns that I'm highlighting on the slide. So clear language is a title, and then under it, it has clear, unambiguous language that is appropriate for the context. And then there's a line, and then the next one, and then a line, and the next one. So using those kinds of formatting resources to help really sort of enable people to see where things begin and end. Objective 4, help users avoid mistakes and know how to correct them. And this goes back to the Kwame user story as well. Thinking about Kwame, he hit the back button and now he's lost everything, right? So what are ways that we can actually help our users? What are some patterns? Well, we can provide assistance. And in order to programmatically provide assistance, we think about things like autofill or auto-correcting. Rather than forcing the user to adapt how they enter content to your model, use the technologies that are now really well built and matured to, on the systems end, format that input the way that it needs to be and save the user that effort. Or gather information that they have said, yes, you can use this in autofill, so that they don't have to fill in the form every time and potentially misspell their name or flip a number in their address. We already talked about making sure that undo and the back button are reliable, that these work as expected. And it's also important to allow and respect common reset operations, such as common undo keyboard commands, rather than trying to sort of reprogram them to do different things in your applications. And then offering inline user support can be an incredible design pattern to help people avoid mistakes. So providing helpful labels, examples, step-by-step instructions, illustrations, putting the error messages directly where the user needs to fix an error can be really helpful. So the next objective here then is helping the user focus. And in this case, what we're talking about is really the user's ability to direct their focus continually where it needs to be, but also their ability to redirect their focus when needed, and their ability to return back to something that they were focusing on before and get back where they needed to be without making a mistake or becoming lost. So the patterns that are highlighted here are avoid distractions, to remove features that can take the user off of their current task before it's complete. I have my own story where I forgot to pay a utility bill because I thought I had paid it. I thought I had completed the process, and then something called me away. And I didn't actually submit the payment. So, you know, I think many of us have those stories. And then clarify the current step. Let the user know where they are in the process. Are they on step 3? Great. They know they're on step 3? Wonderful. But how many steps are there? Are there 5 steps? Are there 87 steps? How does step 3 actually fit into the scheme of the process that they're in? Make sure that they know where they are in the process, make sure that they know what's left, and make sure that they know what they need as they're going through each step. And then finally, the final one highlighted here is offer your users some tools to reorient themselves. Provide ways for them to sort of get back if they're distracted, and make sure that they know how to know where they are in the process and what they haven't finished. So I think we've sort of talked about a lot of these in other contexts, but Objective 6 is all about ensuring processes do not rely on memory. We cannot trust our users' memory because there are so many other things competing for it. So really build that into the interface. Don't force the user to have to use something that that everything else is also trying to use. Help them remember what they just did. Help them access or reference information from a previous step on the screen. For example, for Kwame, let him know what he just added to his shopping cart so that he doesn't have to use the back button in order to figure it out. Provide accessible authentication or provide memory aids to help people through password completion and multi-step logins. And then think about voice menus and how much memory voice menus rely on and how difficult they can be. So offer easy ways through voice menus for people to access human help so that they don't have to remember all of the options in that menu. Objective 7 is about providing help and support. And this goes really into making sure that your users can get the help that they need. They can get human help. They can get help from the features in the system, and they can give you feedback. They can tell you what's not working for them. Also, give them directions and sequencing tools. Tell them where they are in the steps. Break down multi-step tasks so that they can do these things one at a time. And then help them with task management. Help them prepare ahead of time and give them a way to move into the task ahead so that they can complete it successfully. And finally, Objective 8, which is support adaptation and personalization. This one is my personal favorite. The user knows best what they need and what will support them and give them the best experience. So adapt to them. Adapt to the user rather than forcing them to adapt to you. Find ways to set up your design to be used in multiple ways so that they can use their strengths, they can use the assistive devices that they may be using, and they can do so successfully. Respect user preferences. If the user has set system level font sizes, colors, and inputs, if they're using a switch device, if they need enormous text, let them have that. The pixels in your design should be able to still be wonderful with those differences in mind. And support or allow for the extensions and APIs that your users may be using. Some people may be using very specific tools to help them through their experience, very specific browser extensions. And don't override those. Let them be, respect them as they are. And wow, is that a lot of information. So I'm so sorry to give you so much information at once, but these slides do have a link to content usable. And as of this morning, I literally just added this to the slide. As of this morning, we have a landing page for supplemental guidance that will be a little easier to read because it'll be more concise. And that should be released sometime in the next month. So there's a link there. Our slides have resources, so please take advantage of those. And then finally, the thank you slide has ways to get involved. So this is my plea to you. Join us. Join the Cognitive Accessibility Task Force if you want to be part of W3C, or join the community group if you want a more lightweight way to be involved. I would love to see you there. Thank you.
Thanks, Rain. And there's been so much feedback in the chat and in questions just saying how much everybody appreciates you. You're very charming. They could listen to you talk for hours. You're very informative. So great information. I'm afraid we don't have a lot of time for questions, which is fine. But there's one that's at the top that everybody's voted for that I think, Rain, you and I were talking about that I think it's great to address. So the question is, are there any thoughts on long COVID prevalence impacting the world of cognitive accessibility design? So we talked about that a little bit about our children and COVID and everything. Do you have any thoughts you want to share on that?
Wow, that is a poignant question for the moment. And I think really what I would say is there's two things. There's long COVID and the effects that long COVID is having, which probably really just means that the numbers I gave at the beginning are woefully low. That we are really looking at probably far more of our population could benefit from the kinds of patterns that we're talking about here than we're even beginning to realize right now. But I'll also add here that kind of the long impacts of COVID for the foreseeable future and beyond, I think really means that we're moving into a future where we are going to exist hybrid, in person and remote, in all of our conferences, interactions, schooling, work. And that means that these digital experiences are our lifeline. They are our foundation. They are our structure now. And if they are not accessible, then it becomes a barrier to so many people being able to achieve their potential and contribute in the world. So I think this just underscores how critical and how much of an imperative this really is.
It does. All right, I want to thank you, Rain. I've learned so much. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who's attended today. Friendly reminder, you can come back and watch the recording at any time. And I hope you come back and enjoy the rest of XCon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.